It's Wednesday, December 27th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is Andy Behrens. Andy, what's going on, buddy? How was your Christmas?
Christmas was good. Setting aside the NFL, Christmas was lovely. You may notice I have a different backdrop today. If you're seeing any of this, I'm in Sarasota with the in-laws. It's delightful. You might hear some voices in the background. You might hear the occasional dog. We're just going to power through it. NFL wise, Matt, that was the most painful week 16 that I can recall, just fantasy wise, since the Jerry Rice, Steve Young debacle of '95. I'm hurting today.
What is the Jerry Rice, Steve Young debacle of '95? Keep in mind, I was 4 years old or 5 years old at the time.
It's too soon. I can't even talk about it. No. It was one of the first fantasy leagues that I played in, and I won't give people the full details, but I had what had been to that point in that league, in that scoring system, an absolutely insurmountable lead going into Monday night, and I talked a lot of and the guy I was playing still had Steve Young and Jerry Rice yet to go, and Jerry Rice finished with, I don't know, this is the top of my head, but I want to say he had a dozen or more receptions for 289 yards and 3 touchdowns. Obviously, most of that went to Steve Young, who also maybe had a rushing touchdown. And they those two set scoring records. And then I had to go into work and face everybody the next day. And I'd never been so crushed. I'd never been so crestfallen. Like, I legitimately almost called in sick. It was a terrible feeling. And I had talked all of the the day before too, so or the Friday before. So it was a rough one. It was a rough one for me. But I found like 6 different ways to lose this week. Many of which are actually going to be represented by listeners in today's show. So really looking forward to reliving all that trauma. Oh yeah,
I'm happy that you are here once again, not calling in sick, powering through your misery today, Andy Behrens. And yeah, please weave in some of your misery with the listener misery here. We are going to do the post week 16 version of the Fantasy Forensic Files. But before we get into that, just want to do a little programming note here. This is our last panic meter pod of the season, so I just want to extend a thank you to everyone that's contributed, obviously to Andy for being my co-pilot through all this, but most importantly to you all out there that contributed with your submissions. Just to pull back the curtain a little, we knew this fantasy season we wanted to get you, the people, involved, and when we came with the panic meter back in the summer, we did not picture it going as well as it did this year, so appreciate that. This episode has actually been consistently our most watched, most downloaded, most consumed pod of the week, consistently a top 100 Apple Sports pod as well. So shout out to you all. Could not be possible without you. I mean, Andy, who knew that panic was truly the one thing that we could dial into that the people really needed to talk about.
I do want to really thank people for this, because when you submit names to a concept like this, you are exposing yourself to potential ridicule, right? Like, there are going to be some situations where, like, I get really mad that we're talking about Lamar Jackson again. Okay. You might get, we might rough you up a little bit. And maybe it's what you need.
No, just you. No, just
fair,
you.
Fair. You have been a lot more understanding with the people than I am, as is your way. I have been a little, I don't know, this is about as ornery as I get, is actually on this pod each week. So it's been, we're very grateful for people continuing to feed us content for this.
Oh yeah, 100%. Mostly because it makes our jobs a little easier on a Monday morning when it's like, wow, that was a lot of information to digest. What should we really, really focus on? That was like my original thought for this podcast. What should we really dive in a little deeper on? And the people giving us the topics. Look, I'll take anything that makes the job a little bit easier. And so shout out again to the people for that. I actually want to give a shout out to one user who sent in something to the mailbag that we won't get into today, because it was kind of like, actually, Andy, again, you causing problems here, responding to one of your, like, what worked, did any strategy really worked? Matthew B, want to give a shout out to them, because we will get to that part of the question about, like, strategy review, but not really on this podcast. We'll do more like look back stuff later. But again, Matthew said to start his email, this podcast has helped me understand football more, which is, I think, the point over pure fantasy, and then removes a lot of the superfluous kind of just like fantasy talk about, I love it that they actually said, which week do you get in and out to start Jerry Jeudy? I was like, love Jerry Jeudy getting one last reference there. But yeah, no, I think that is the goal, at least for me, for this podcast, to make you just smarter about the game, both the fake game and the real game. And we're going to be doing a lot of that in the offseason. But for now, let's get into the post week 16 fantasy forensic files. We asked you, the people, to send in any just sort of how you went down, how you lost this week, and we're going to break down how it happened and maybe some lessons that we can learn from it. So starting with our first mailbag submission here, Mark B says, I lost by 1.6 points and all due to horrific roster management. Talked myself into Mullins instead of Flacco or Jordan Love, agonized over Kenneth Walker and DeAndre Swift, decided to stick with Walker, started the Bears defense over the Browns, and the final kicker is 2 minutes before kickoff on the early Sunday games. I swapped out Walker for Ridley, but didn't pull the trigger on submitting the lineup change. I talked myself into the possibility of another Ridley dud, even in a plus matchup against the Bucs. Just wasn't worth the risk. Too much overthinking and indecisiveness cost me a semi-final win. Just making the right call on one of those, and I would have advanced. Christmas was ruined, and 2024 is doomed. Love the podcast. Must listen content. Yeah, Andy, I mean, is there any lesson we can learn about kind of early Sunday morning tinkering here?
I will first say when it's a quarterback decision like this, and one of the losses that I suffered this week, it didn't come down to that quarterback decision, but I had the same one. I had the same Mullins Flacco thing, and I mistakenly determined that the ceiling in that one was with Mullins. I think it's also safe to say that the floor is always with Nick Mullins, right? He's not traditionally great, right? And he could have, I thought he just played his way into a situation where he didn't necessarily deserve to start that game. He might have given them the best chance to win. He probably gives you the best chance at big plays, but you are also basically guaranteed 2, 3, 4 turnovers that you're going to have to survive along the way. So I chose Nick Mullins because he was the guy who was throwing to Jefferson and Addison and Hawkinson. And hey, not your fault that 2 of those guys got hurt. Certainly not your fault that Nick Mullins threw 4 picks and could have turned the ball over a few more times. It was a ceiling play, and it turned out that Joe Flacco had the highest ceiling of the week, right? Like I didn't really see that coming. He's been great. I mean, he's a total pro. Incredible run that he's on, but I was with you on that one. I saw the ceiling as being with Mullins. So I also don't I tend not to feel terrible if the guys that I left on the bench who outperform my starters are actually pretty sketchy players. You're not really going to kick yourself that you left Joe Flacco on the bench, right? And I know he's on this heater right now, but that's not the kind of stuff that sticks with me. When I leave an actual good player on the bench, that does get me. So I understand what coming up. Yeah, I understand what you're talking about with Swift and Ridley. They made sense. The one thing that I will say with Ken Walker, he had 17 touches in that game, and he was coming off a big game against Philly, right? So. It's not like I think your process was bad here. And I think if somebody would have told you in advance, hey, Kenneth Walker gets 17 touches here, you would have been cool. I'm definitely starting that guy. It just didn't happen 1 week after it did. So that's not, that doesn't. I'm kind of patting you on the back here. I'm not really doing anything that could fix the way you're feeling. But I don't think that was a bad call, and you actually got the usage that you were probably looking for.
Yeah, and. Look, I mean, you were kind of right to be sketched out by Calvin Ridley. I mean, by the way, the Jaguars got smoked in that game. It was a completely non-competitive performance. The 90 yards and 2 touchdowns that Calvin Ridley got, it would have been nice to get that at some point, earlier in the season in a more predictable spot than when we got it here. So I'm actually not killing you for that either, even though, yes, it was a plus matchup. You could I think you could have talked yourself in or out of Calvin Ridley. So and you tried to do it, you just didn't submit the lineup decision. So, I mean,
this is such a good point. Calvin Ridley played his way into a situation in which he was not a layup start. So I don't, that's not totally on you.
No, it's not totally on you. And yeah, I mean, the Kenneth Walker stuff, that's going to happen. By the way, DeAndre Swift was certainly not a bankable player either. To me, Andy, I felt in the second half of that game, really the final few drives, that was the first time I thought the Eagles had really like put on their big boy pants and just established the run like they
Yeah.
did so often last year. It felt like it was the first time they did that in months.
Yeah, since the back-to-back early performances by DeAndre Swift that seem like a lifetime ago, right? Like he had the 2 big games and he's had a pretty adversarial relationship with the goal line ever since, right? And we know that when they get inside the 3, we know what's happening, and it's not generally DeAndre Swift. So I understand resting him. I certainly would have told you that the greater chance of anybody scoring a touchdown there was going to be Kenneth Walker. So that's not a decision that I'd be, I don't know. You can feel bad. You should feel bad, I guess. You lost.
Sure.
But
Yeah, you lost.
that's not one that I'm gonna kick myself for like forever. That's not gonna become the Jerry Rice, Steve Young game for me. I'm not talking about that one on a podcast in 30 years, I'll tell you that.
Well, let's hope not. Let's hope you're still talking about the Jerry Rice, Steve Young thing in 30 years on this podcast, buddy. I mean, I don't know if you want to put up with me for 30 more years. Yeah, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to. And yeah, lastly on the quarterback thing, it's just there actually wasn't that big of a separation between these guys. Like I would, if I was you, Mark B, and Nick Mullins threw 4 picks with no touchdowns, then I'm kicking myself. Okay, but the fact that you got 20.5 points out of Mullins, and then Flacco, like again, the separations, he's a QB1, but he's only got 26.8 points. So really in reality, I think these were all very close guys. And like I don't think Mullins was the wrong decision, even though he didn't help you get a win. I actually think those were all 3 right decisions there, to play Mullins, to play Love, to play Flacco. You just happened to get the least right one. So I actually don't want to kill you for your process here. I will just say though, I am generally not a Sunday morning tinkerer. And I think this is kind of the overall thing I want to say here. And look, and 2 things. One, if you had tinkered yourself into the Ridley thing over Kenneth Walker, I look like an idiot for telling you not to tinker on Sunday morning. That being said, though, and some of this is because of just like the nature of our job. We don't have FFL on Sunday morning now, but you're still doing other stuff on Sunday morning. Like I try to set those lineups in advance and be confident in the decision I make and just set it and kind of forget it, and don't sit there on Sunday morning. Like I have tinkered a little bit actually this Sunday more than ever because we don't have freaking FFL to take me all the way up to kickoff. And I've made some dumb decisions in a variety of leagues because of it. So I actually kind of think there is something to be said for just, again, being disciplined, being confident in the decision, and getting that stuff done before Sunday, so you just don't even think about it that morning.
Yeah, no, this is a very good point because there has to be some real actionable information for me to make a lineup change on a Sunday morning.
Right.
Like you don't want to, because generally speaking, this isn't always true. Sometimes you just spend the whole week panicking about a lineup decision. I get that, but generally speaking, you're going to be more rational on like a Wednesday, on a Thursday, on a Friday, and then you're going to get close to kickoff, and I don't know, you'll be watching some pregame show, and they're going to say something nice about the player that you've got on your bench. You'll be like, oh man, that's a message from the beyond telling me to start, and you'll just make a boneheaded decision that isn't based on process or the logic that went into your original call. It's just going to be some quirky, unnecessary move that you make without, I need to hear that somebody's going to be out and it's unexpected, and all of a sudden my guy on my bench is going to come into additional work, and then I'll sub somebody in. Or it's going to be some like meteorological hellscape, and the weather forces me into a different decision.
Yeah, it's like Jay Glazer has to be dropping a heater, not like you saw a bunch of fantasy analysts posting about some player that they're only posting on Sunday morning so they can quote tweet 8 hours later with like a look at me, point down, look at me type situation. Sunday morning is not for tinkering. Like, get your homework done early, okay? Get it done early so you don't have to think about it on Sunday, so that Sunday morning you can do what you should be doing on Sunday morning, which is making absurd parlays that are never going to hit and just burning like $20 at a time on same game parlays. Okay, that's what you should be doing Sunday morning, not tinkering with your fantasy football lineup. By the way, speaking of parlays, and what the real tragedy of this situation is that I would have been able to pay for like multiple Christmases if TJ Hawkinson had caught 2 more passes on Sunday in this same game parlay I made with that Lions Vikings game. Again, the real tragedy though is not that. The real tragedy is that we actually are getting news right now that TJ Hawkinson confirmed done for the year, and it's an ACL and an MCL tear. So that was a pretty serious knee injury. He was on his way to a great game. Clearly going to hit the over on 5.5 catches. And just again, it's a blow to a Vikings offense that, man, they have suffered through so much. Speaking of Nick Mullins, I said on the Sunday show, like Kevin O'Connell, I don't know how he's going to age like a president this season. And now Addison probably out. I would guess he's week. Yeah. He's week to week, I believe, right now. Hawkinson's down. Damn, Justin Jefferson's missed so much time this year. It's been a rough year for Minnesota.
That's it's brutal news on Hawkinson, who was he might currently be the overall tight end one, and he was certainly tracking to finish as the overall tight end one. Obviously,
he's two behind another Iowa tight end. He is number 2.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a battle between Laporta and Hawk for the rest of the season. That's really just an awful set of circumstances for Minnesota. And the Addison thing, like pursuing. I think it was the second Mullins interception, right? Pursuing the tackle on that friendly fire, hit by his own guy near the sideline. Just an ugly day all around.
Very ugly day. So hopefully TJ Hawkinson can get better and come back strong for next year, because that offense should be fun next year if they can bring Kirk Cousins back. If he's 100%, who knows? We shall see. Tyler H., our next mailbag submission. 2 years ago, I lost in my fantasy semifinals for benching T. Higgins for Tyler Lockett, the game that T. Higgins went off for 40 points. As a Clemson alum, Tyler did that as a Clemson alum. So pretty big rough spot there, because T. Higgins obviously is a Clemson wide receiver. Had I won, I would have won our championship. Now, I will let a picture of my walking nightmare tell the rest of our story. His lineup shows that he benched Amari Cooper behind CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Adams, and Ty Chandler at his flex spot. Okay, CeeDee Lamb, he was a right answer. He scored a bunch of points. It's fine. Adams and Chandler, look, Chandler did find his way into the end zone, but Devontae Adams, I want to not come in here as Captain Hindsight on this one, okay? Adams scored 0.9 points. Game script got away from him in that game. Adams was on a lot of lineups that got submitted that we didn't end up using, again, just because he scores 0.9 points. It stinks, but when your defense scores 2 touchdowns in 7 seconds, your game script is going to go to hell, and it is what it is. That
also,
being said,
they tried to get him. They tried to get him the ball. Like, he was peppered with targets on those opening drives. It just wasn't happening.
It just was not happening, and that's where I kind of want to, again, not try to sound like Captain Hindsight here, Andy, but I feel like Amari Cooper. Like, I don't want to dig the knife in here, Tyler, but I feel like Cooper was in a much better setup than Devontae Adams going into this one. So I don't know. Is there something like we can say about getting caught up in names over current like outlooks? Because obviously, like, it's Devontae Adams. How do I bench Devontae Adams? Oh, well, there's a reason you can bench Devontae Adams at this point.
Yeah, I get it. And this one, I understand the regret, because you definitely could have gone Cooper over Ty Chandler. Cooper is, I think I saw you tweet this. Like, he's legit playing the best ball that I can. Obviously at a monster game, like a historic performance just this past week. But prior to that, like these last couple of years, like the season that he had last year, in a terrible environment, really great. Like this is peak Amari Cooper. He's playing really well, and I feel like one of the it's kind of down the list a bit, but one of the lessons of this season and last has really been his leveling up to some extent. So I feel like he belongs in the conversation with, maybe not like as an all timer with Devontae Adams, but
sure,
he's up there now. I feel like he's moved himself up a tier.
I think he's moved himself up a tier. Look, you didn't know he was going to have 265 yards. And you didn't know that was coming. But I just, again, even if you take the names away from this, because I definitely do not think, while Amari Cooper has, in my mind, leveled up from, I thought, a inconsistent, volatile number 2 receiver in Dallas and in Oakland at times in his career. Like, I think he has been a true blue number 1 X receiver in Cleveland, like going out there playing the hardest position you can play in wide receiver land. And he's been as good as you could possibly be in that. That being said, I still don't think he's in like Devontae Adams' class. I still don't think he is in like a Stefon Diggs, another disappointing player. I've not gotten a chance to go back and chart any of the recent film for Diggs yet. I know that is on my to-do list, people, so I'll get to it before the end of the week, because I know this is a big talking point, but I don't think he's in like that class of player, even if those guys are ticking down and he's ticking up. I don't think he's in that class. But I'm just saying, from a situational perspective, like, you've got one guy in Amari Cooper who I think has leveled up, so that there's a part of it, but also just the way Cleveland's offense is going right now, like it's weird because it's Joe Flacco, man, but like that is an offense that I want to buy into. I want to find, to use an Andy Behrens phrase, I want to find creative ways to invest into the Joe Flacco, Kevin Stefanski fire show they got going over there. And like the Raiders offense is one that I want to kind of try to find ways to talk myself out of, even if Antonio Pierce has them balling out as a team, just the offense isn't there right now.
Right. No, I think those are both good calls. Cleveland's wild right now, right? Like I don't think Flacco's attempted fewer than 42 passes in any game, right? So volume is just always there with Cleveland, which is exciting. And Njoku's playing out of his mind. Amari Cooper is just absolutely fantastic. He's carried what he was doing last season into a much richer environment this year. So I think Cooper is basically somebody that you cannot even think of benching, particularly when he has a great matchup. And he had a really solid matchup, obviously, this last week and crushed it.
Joe Flacco's 35th in the NFL in pass attempts, which I know that doesn't sound like all that impressive, but he's only played four games.
That's what is wild. That's crazy.
Yeah, 21.3 fantasy points per game. I mean, that is to me, actually the craziest thing about the Flacco stuff. It's not even that he's helping a team run to the playoffs, because it's like, he's a former Super Bowl winning quarterback. Like, I guess I could have, if I smoked enough pot, I could have talked myself into that story, right? Like, if I had enough bourbons, you could have convinced me, like, sure, he's helping a team win the playoffs. The fact that it's turning into like QB1 fantasy production, I actually think is the most bonkers part of it.
This actually, I mean, there have been a few more turnovers this time, but it kind of resembles the run that he went on when they won the Super Bowl, right? Because that was like a 4 or 5 game run from Joe Flacco that did not resemble in any way any other 4 or 5 game stretch that he had in his career or was going to have in his career, right? It was a wild heater that he went on. He was nearly flawless at the most important time, like in franchise history, right? It was an absolutely incredible run. And he's sort of recaptured a little bit of that. And I know he's got a challenging matchup ahead against the Jets, but I would actually find it very difficult to, if I'd made it through with any of my Joe Flacco teams, I would find it really difficult to sit him now.
And that goes the same to Amari Cooper. I mean, I don't think you need me to tell you, like, don't bench a guy coming off a 46 point outing in Yahoo standard scoring. But this is, again, why always tell people, like, you got to look at this thing in like a season in little tiny buckets and chapters, because some of the responses we got from like the emails and especially on social media was, Amari Cooper was really inconsistent and I ended up benching him and stuff like that. Like, yeah, over the course of the season, there's like 2 points, there's 3 points, there's 5 points, there's 2.6, there's whatever. But like, you get to the Flacco run here, man, and it's been, other than he did have 4.9 in Joe Flacco's first start, but you have to remember he left that game with an injury. Like, he has been consistently getting 14 targets, 8 targets, like in these two. Like, it's just tough to bench a player with a quarterback who's putting up numbers and the guy's seeing 14 and 8 targets in a game. Even again, he had 5. He was peppering him early in that game where he left with injury, was Joe Flacco to Amari Cooper. So look, I'm not really helping you out here, other than, again, I think one of the takeaways is just, when you look at it in little buckets as opposed to over the course of the season, they've been inconsistent. I think that can help you out a little bit, but again, not to just drive the knife one more time here. According to Yahoo internal data, Amari Cooper was the player that won you your matchup in Week 16. 87.9% of the rosters with Amari won their matchup. I'm desperately curious to see the other percentage of teams that did not win.
Yeah, I got wrecked as a 1 seed in a semifinal matchup by Amari Cooper. It wasn't even close. Like, it was one of those matchups where he just, like, while the Cooper game was happening, I just stopped watching it. There was no chance, no chance whatsoever.
I did not run into Amari Cooper in Week 16, but I had a very interesting dynamic with this next player we're going to talk about here. Jim K sends in Breece Hall. Breece Hall ended my season, and a very late garbage time meaningless throw to Saquon in a PPR league gave my buddy the edge this week. It was wildly close, exciting game, and I cannot believe I lost by 0.16 points. Shout out to Ryan, quote, the future man Shive, for possibly getting his first championship in our league. I'm still numb and praying for a stat correction. I could have played Olave over Mostert or Metcalf and come away with the win. And, listen, I had 72.2 other points on the bench, but I'm confident in my lineup. After all, I got 169.58 points, would have crushed the other semifinal players. Thanks for a good year, fellas. Number one, I think you got the right mindset here. Olave outscored Mostert and Metcalf, but it wasn't. Look, you fielded a great team. What can you do? Breece Hall, man, so many people were bounced by or advanced because of Breece Hall. I think it's just kind of worth talking about him a little bit more in depth coming out of that game because we didn't spend a lot of time on the Jets and Commanders on the recap show. And like I said, Andy, I had to talk about some of my teams. Literally, Breece Hall was involved in all of my semifinal games this weekend. It just was like, on some of the teams I had, like 50% of the teams I had Breece Hall and 50% I was going against Breece Hall, which is just the most like tortured existence because, and you got different scoring formats too. So in one league, he scored 50 points and another was 43 and another was 37. It's just like,
oh my God,
I don't know what I need from this guy, Breece Hall, but yeah, he was a player again that helped me advance in some spots, knocked me out in some spots. And that was the theme across many responses.
Yeah, I got trucked in a league where I was facing Breece Hall. That was another kind of non-competitive matchup for me. Weird season. Like overall, I think it's going to look good in the final wash, right? He's done so much damage now in 3 games, these last 2 have been basically the best matchups that you can possibly have, right? He went off against Denver. We know that's been a generous matchup to running backs all season, and then he goes off against a Washington defense that is just flatlined, right? So no big revelation there that you have to play your guys against Washington. Other than that, though, I think like if you take the games between Washington and Denver, that's like 9 games in which he averaged 2.5 yards per carry. I mean, it hasn't been a smooth ride. You're very fortunate to have gotten to the semifinals with Breece Hall, right? It hasn't been a pretty year necessarily, but again, it's all going to look fine in the end. I don't know what we're going to do. I mean, man, he might sneak into like the back end of first rounds, early second rounds next year when we really talk ourselves into the Jets with Aaron Rodgers back and a summer of Aaron Rodgers stories and he's looking good and he's talking a great game and like we're going to be like, okay, Breece Hall, another year removed from the knee worries. We're probably going to talk ourselves into Breece Hall as like the overall number 11, 12, 13 pick, something like that.
He is currently the running back 8. Overall. So yeah, and he has 84 targets. He had 16 damn targets in that last game alone.
That's the thing. The reception total is wild, right? The reception total is beyond what anybody would have guessed. And he's like, does it hold with Rodgers? It may, it should. He's a weapon.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is I don't trust Nate Hackett to do anything right. And like that whole coaching staff is going to be brought back, but I do think, and the one game he's not been a great fantasy. You're so right though. It's not like he's been on a heater to end the season here.
Yeah.
He had 1.8 points in week 15, the week prior against the Miami Dolphins. He had 12 rushing yards in that game.
Yeah.
But it was the one game of late where they did not get him the ball in the receiving game. Like his target total is 9, 8, 9, 2. In weeks 11 to 15 to steal a Scott Pianowski favorite. Like look at it like the SAT test. The next number is not going to be 2 again. They didn't think it was going to be 16. But if you told yourself that story, like you could, and against the Commanders who are completely hapless on defense, like, okay, you could start Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall with some level of confidence, even if it was going to be a Trevor Siemian experience.
Yeah. It's been this has been quite a journey for Breece Hall to get to RB8. And again, I feel like it's going to be one of those things where we just and we probably should we probably should in the final analysis we should look back on this Breece Hall season and just be like, man, he stayed healthy. He was a major injury concern coming into the year, and it wasn't always perfect, but he made it through. And now we can feel even better about him going into a season in a richer offensive environment, another year removed from the surgery. Like we should say all those things, but we should also just kind of remember how wherever he finishes this year, if he's the RB7, the RB8, we should remember how he got there. And it was pretty rough a lot of the time.
I think he's a guy that in week 17 in championships, and again, I have him on at least one championship squad. I mean, I'm definitely playing him, and I'm playing him with confidence. Yeah. Even though, again, there's that specter of what if he only gets like 4 balls thrown his way, and he's playing a real NFL defense? That specter is going to haunt me in the back of my mind. But I think he's a guy you just got to close your eyes and play. And maybe just like set your reasonable expectations for like a 15, 16 point ceiling, not
Yeah.
I mean, one league I have 50 damn points. 50 points. Help me get away with starting Devontae Adams in that league, I'll tell you that. All right, let's get into our social submissions here, starting with @DirtyDoesIt. Yikes, I felt weird saying that. The culprit for blowing my season. More interceptions than incompletions. He just sent a screenshot of Brock Purdy with negative 1.6 points. Just a cool 19.07 projection. He missed that by just a little bit. Andy, now that I've had time to really marinate on that game, like, I don't even feel like Brock Purdy, like, quote, played poorly because he threw 4 interceptions, but like some of them are tips and so it's like some of them it's just, what do you want the guy to do? Like, the Ravens came to play on defense. I was convinced in this game, like, this game was not going to become some shootout because one of these defenses was going to, or both of them are going to come to play and they were going to keep the other offense in check. That didn't happen so much on the Ravens side. It was like a chapter of the game where they really went wild on the 49ers defense, but there were times where the 49ers even played well on defense. Like, I just think that game says a lot more about Baltimore and not that much about Purdy. I know it doesn't help you from a fantasy perspective, but that's how I feel coming out of that game.
Yeah, I agree with that fully. I, by the way, had I lost every kind of way this past weekend. One of those ways was going into a semifinal matchup in which I literally just needed, we were basically dead even. He had Justin Tucker, I had Brock Purdy, and I got smashed. Like, that thing wasn't even, it wasn't that close by halftime, and it certainly wasn't close at the end of the game. That was actually brutal. I do agree with you. I'm seeing people go a pretty far distance trying to excuse some of the turnovers are just bad. They're bad results.
Yeah.
I do think you're right to say that we just got to credit Baltimore's defense for a lot of that stuff. Like, Hamilton played like a genius level game. Here's hoping the injury is not too bad because he played just a genius level game. A fantastic player. But like, I don't want to just totally excuse the batted ball interceptions because that's just a great defense doing stuff. That was very, very well played. And those things can happen. So like, in the course of any season, you throw the ball enough, there are going to be like, I don't know what the number is. I don't know if it's 6. I don't know if it's 8. There are going to be a handful of interceptions that are just not totally on the quarterback, right? That are just the defense making plays. A couple of other balls that were definitely on Purdy, and it was not a wide margin for error sort of game, right? I mean, it basically came down to, I don't know. It was a wonderful game. It was a great watch, but Baltimore's defense stepping up. And then there were, of course, a number of times, at least enough times, where it felt like San Francisco's defense did everything right, and Lamar still did some crazy shit, right? Like, you had those two things going on, and between them, incredibly impressive performance by Baltimore in all areas. And they overcame that ridiculous safety, which you will never again see, right? Like, sometimes stuff like that happens early in a game and you're like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, that's how I felt. And this is the thing, though. This is what's so annoying about being so results driven with football is, like, I feel like Lamar Jackson played in that game exactly how he's played all year, which has been fantastic. Yeah. And then people are like, well, the numbers aren't really there. And no show has talked about that more than this show, the Panic Meter podcast, Andy, that, like, all right, the end of numbers aren't there, but like, the guy is playing fantastic. What do you want me to tell you? Like, that's just the reality of it. And same thing on the other side with Purdy. It's like, oh man, the stats. Like, I thought we had evolved as a football universe, and I'm so wrong to be this naive and think this way, but like, to just be like, hey, we got to look beyond the box score, bro. Like, especially when we're talking about quarterback performance, like, where so many things are contextual and it's a great example of why it's hard to evaluate that position just on its own, because yes, and I've said on the show, especially to Dalton as he's caping up for Purdy, like, if Purdy had won MVP, if he had kept rolling, fine, whatever. I'm not gonna lose sleep over it. I don't care one way or another. But this is the problem with it is how he played last night is exactly how Brock Purdy has played all year long. He just hasn't always gotten away. He has gotten away at times with being reckless with the ball because he has great teammates and there's a big wide margin for error. And he's a really good player in his own right. Nobody can deny that. Like, I don't need to see a bunch of like anti Brock Purdy victory laps off last night. He's a really good player. He's a really good quarterback. He's a damn good quarterback for the 49ers, but he was putting the ball in harm's way at times, and he just wasn't totally getting banged for it. Last night he got banged for it. Like, it doesn't fundamentally change who he is as a player. Just, again, I think he was playing this way all year long.
No, it's exactly the right point. And it did get a little bit uncomfortable with people taking whatever. Like, if you're rooting for Lamar Jackson to win MVP, and people have wagering stakes in this. They have rooting interest depending on who their team is. So it's nobody's like totally impartial out there. Brock Purdy definitely had a case. Like, Brock Purdy might have had the case going into that week. I feel like Lamar just snatched it from him. The other thing that I think is wild about the MVP discussion, and I feel like I have tickets on like 5 players. I don't know. One of those is Lamar from a million years ago. But like, why do we always have to come up with a rotating cast of characters who are in the MVP debate? Like, I thought we could just give it a day where we were like, wow, Lamar Jackson really stated his case, and it's him. But instead, we're now on to this next week's matchup between Lamar and Tua is going to settle the MVP, and then I'm sure there's going to be one beyond that is going to definitively settle the MVP. I don't know, like, look. Lamar should pretty clearly be in the driver's seat right now, I think.
Well, that's the thing. The last 2 words that you said there, right now, is the big part of it. And like, why we do this is why Brock Purdy and Lamar are going to play each other. That's going to settle a long way with the discussion, because this is an end of season award. And like, when we look, how we feel about it in week 15 and week 14 and week 13 doesn't really matter. Like, and really how we feel about any of it doesn't matter, because we don't actually, like, there's no real barometer on what this award is, which is why arguing about it is fruitless. I think last night got so victory lappy, because it's pretty clearly like 2 schools right now that are fighting against each other. It's like the EPA zealots versus and like the stats zealots versus the like just watch the game zealots. And I don't really care about Twitter wars, number one, but I definitely am like watch the game zealot between the 2 of them. So I think I see where those 2 camps are like, these are 2 clearly candidates that live in those camps. Like, Brock Purdy is he's got the resume, he's got the EPA per play, the whole blah, blah, blah. And then there's this like Lamar Jackson, watch the game and tell me that guy's not bringing value, but there's no real barometer to what the word is. There's no real rules. Right. So arguing about it and being in Twitter wars, that's the real lesson from this podcast. Don't do that.
Also, it's weird that we've all just sort of defaulted to the idea that apparently it has to be a quarterback, because that's all it's been for a while, right? And I do think that these seasons are wild, and maybe over the coming weeks it's going to get so clear in Lamar's favor that it won't feel this way anymore. But like, when we have one of these seasons where, for a long stretch of time, we have like 4 or 5 quarterbacks and none of them have really separated from the pack necessarily. And then we have a couple guys doing the stuff that Tyreek Hill has done and that CMC have done. I don't know. I feel like the original intent of the award certainly would have allowed those guys into the discussion, and they just haven't been there.
Yeah. It is a weird thing where we're just like, it's a quarterback award. Says who? Like, says who?
We've literally had a kicker win this award. We've had defensive players and a kicker win this award. So like, it doesn't have to be. I know what the modern game is, and I know the importance of the quarterback position right now, but man, I just don't like, I feel like they weren't thinking far ahead, and they weren't like really parsing the phrasing when they just didn't realize how value would be interpreted, how valuable was going to be interpreted by future generations of voters.
I love that it sounds like we're talking about like interpreting religious stocks or like the Constitution. Yeah. The forefathers didn't really know, this amendment. Sorry for getting political. Okay, let's move on to another social submission here from @JuneUCLA. They highlighted DJ Moore, Devon Achane as 2 guys that ruined their season in week 16. Also, they mentioned they had Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. That stack was the top scorer of the regular season. Didn't really matter in the fantasy postseason. DJ Moore, I mean, he left that game for a little bit with an injury. It is what it is kind of thing with DJ Moore. I don't know that there's a ton to learn there. It was a good matchup. You were starting DJ Moore like 10 times out of 10 in that game.
He was pretty gimpy too. Like coming back into that game, he clearly wasn't comfortable. And I think his availability is probably a question going forward. It's been what a win this season though. Like DJ Moore has been an absolute absolute W for your team. So I wouldn't, you can feel bad about the actual stat line in week 16, but what a terrific year he's had.
Achane, though, I want to kind of dial in on here because we got a lot of responses of, I just felt like I had to play him, because of the upside. Like, man, I mean, how could you put that on your bench in a matchup against the Cowboys, all this stuff? I mean, he just wasn't a useful player in this game, and it's been like a while since we've seen that upside. So I'm just curious, like, how are you approaching a player, specifically Achane, and just a guy like that we do have these memories of him being a monster producer, and he did produce incredibly well in the second half against Washington when they blew them out a few weeks ago. But the real, like, Devon Achane is a part of the Dolphins offense, and he's ripping teams' hearts out.
Yeah,
that was like 2 months ago now at this point.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this was even in a game where Raheem Mostert got dinged, right? And did return to the game, but there was a path to Achane if he was fully healthy, fully operational, to have a monster performance in this one. Great game, like super fun game to watch. And we had just seen what James Cook did to that Dallas defense, right? So it was really easy to talk yourself into this idea that, man, Mostert and Achane can do whatever James Cook just did. And I talked myself into that in at least one league. And I think maybe the story here is that we just need to be taking these Achane injury notes a little bit more seriously. Like, that's not nothing. He's pretty clearly not the same guy who came out of the gates moving at a different speed than almost anybody else on the field, and just an explosive play waiting to happen on every touch. It's not quite like that anymore, and a little bit of that might be health related.
That is definitely true. And he's a 5'9", 188-pound running back.
Yeah.
That's a part of this discussion here. But again, it's been a long time since he went for 49, 25, and 21 points, like all in a row in weeks 3, 4, and 5. This has been a weird year for him. He's definitely a guy that the end of season numbers are not going to tell the story at all, because he's only played 9 games, but he's the running back 26. He has 15.9 points per game, which isn't in the group that he's around from a points per game perspective is like Jaylen Warren and Chuba Hubbard. Just not really indicative of the player that Achane was at that ceiling. Yeah. I will say this one thing I want you to hammer home to you people out there. Like, this is where again, watching the games, like digging beyond just the player versus position thing can be really instructive, because if you think about the way that Buffalo specifically runs the ball and where they were hurt, like where they were able to hurt Dallas. I know that James Cook is not like a big bruising back, but they run a lot of like duo, man, power, like at you right up the gut run schemes, run concepts. And like Miami, I was watching this game with a bunch of like Cowboys fans. And like, why do they keep running to the outside? Like, why do they keep trying to hit us? Like, we're Dallas, we're light up front. We don't have big bodies in the middle. We have small linebackers. Like, why do they keep trying to go to the outside? I'm like, because they're an outside zone run team. Like, This is who they are. They can't just here in week 16 suddenly become like especially running behind their backup center, like become an at you run team. By the way, with a 5'9", 188-pound running back, and even Raheem Mostert is like an outside zone merchant. Really, they did finally kind of go up the gut a little bit with Jeff Wilson late in the game, and he's, I guess, their biggest back. So it just is, again, sometimes it does help to dig a little bit. Not that like playing Mostert was always the right call and you should play him 100 times out of 100 there, but when you're going down to the Achane part of it, you think about just how he hurts teams. It's not really in the same way that Dallas had been hurt by running games previously.
Yeah, no, it's fair. The other part of this tweet that I really feel is the Herbert Keenan stack, which is another one that I had on one of my best teams, and obviously I've been managing around that for a couple weeks now because of the Herbert situation. I think they're just going to keep Keenan in the holster for the rest of the year. I don't see why they would risk him, but that is like good process by you. It was working out for a long time, and Keenan was a huge success story. I feel for you there.
At MGT Josh says, how about like 5 guys, but especially I started Stefon Diggs and James Cook over Puka Nacua and Breece Hall. Was the first place team all year too. Look, Breece Hall, like, and James Cook, that's a tough one there. I don't know how you could bench James Cook after what he did. Last
That's what
week.
I was going to say. I can't imagine benching James Cook off of that game, and off of the way that he had been used and the way that the keys to the offense had recently been turned over to him. There's no way. And knowing, again, like we talked through Breece Hall and all of a sudden he's the RB8, but like his numbers for 2 months had not looked great outside of the receiving usage.
And I think, though, the other one, I was kind of surprised by how many people sent in that they benched Puka Nacua. I mean, maybe because he didn't smash in like the Washington matchup, which was so gorgeous. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how you could bench Puka. And like, this is a kind of similar situation we talked about with Devontae Adams earlier, where it's like, it's Stefon Diggs, but his role in the offense has been marginalized. And I don't know that it's a Diggs problem, but just like his role in the offense has been marginalized, and the team is winning games because of it, which is ultimately what I think everybody here wants. Like, everybody wants to win games and be a part of a Super Bowl push here. I think the narrative that Diggs just wants a bunch of targets is not really the right one, although maybe his relationship with the team is fractured. I don't know the answer to that stuff, but like, it's crazy to say this, but Puka Nacua is so much more central to what the Rams do on offense and how they succeed on offense right now than Stefon Diggs is to the Bills.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I have Puka over Diggs this week. They were close last week. I am shocked at the number of questions that were coming in, not only like in FFL throughout the week about starting Nacua. I don't know how many. I mean, maybe this is just one of those situations where it's like, you added him from the wire. It was a great ad. You didn't necessarily need it. You're stacked at receiver, perhaps. And man, do I really sit Stefon Diggs? Do I really sit Justin Jeff? Whoever you're considering for Puka Nacua? But man, Nacua he's more than put himself in that top 10, top 12 discussion rest of season. You're about to wrestle with this call again in the third place matchup. I think I would have Nacua here in place of Diggs.
All right, I got to end with this one from @RodneyRoy. I didn't want to do a bunch of just like, look at my loss, because it's not really like anything. I want to have something instructive to say off these, but we got to look at this guy's loss because @RodneyRoy sends in Pacheco getting credited with the fumble that Mahomes dropped. Pacheco and Hawkinson getting knocked out with injuries in the third quarter of their respective games. Lamar Jackson tripping over the ref results in a safety for San Francisco 49ers defense. The fantasy gods were simply not on my side. All of those things happening resulted in a 116.32 loss to 116.46. Like, that's how close it was. And you could point to all those things. Yeah, he's right. Fantasy gods just not on my side on this one. Sometimes, listen, I don't have anything actionable to tell you people, because sometimes you just weren't meant to win this year.
I got to tell you, I lost 6 fantasy semifinals this past weekend. Again, it was a bleak, ugly weekend for me fantasy wise. None of them affected me the way I would be affected by losing to that damn safety. That safety was wild. Literally the umpire falling down accidentally while backpedaling and tripping Lamar Jackson, who like no defender could bring down all night. The umpire brought him down and it resulted in a safety. And if I'd lost by that margin, I don't know, man. I might have. I would have soldiered through and done this podcast, but I would have taken a day off at some point this week. I would need to work out some feelings. Wow.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd be jacked up to play next year.
Yeah, right. Like that might end. Yeah. I mean, it can't at this point. It's a job. I love doing it, but man, I would need a little break. I would need a little break from fantasy.
We just honestly, some people in the industry try to hide from this reality. We don't do this. Like, a game is just such a random thing, man. That is an extreme example, but there are so many little instances where just last night was a great example too, just because so many people lost on like the last Ayuk catch or something crazy like that, right? It just there's a very thin margin for error, man. And honestly, like sometimes you just got to get lucky. You got to get a little lucky, and that is about as unlucky as you could possibly get.
Yeah, it hurts when when you feel like everything about your process was good and the decisions you made were really good. Like obviously Pacheco was a good start. Hawk was a good start. You were going to get more stats there. You could just see what CEH did in relief of Pacheco. And if you just plug in those numbers, it was definitely enough for you. Just absolutely painful.
Yeah, just got to find a way to be content with it. Hopefully, this podcast helped you do that. Before we get to the waiver wire pickups here, Andy, we got to just talk panic a little bit heading into week 17. I don't know if you have someone you are freaked out about. I actually wanted to highlight this listener question that we got here. Casey H sent in, I need some help with my tight end spot / roster construction for my championship matchup. I've been riding TJ Hawkinson all season, but I also drafted Sam Laporta. I normally wouldn't think twice about just plugging him in, but I'm second guessing it now because I have Gibbs and I have St. Brown. Is starting 3 Lions players against Dallas too much? I picked up Waller as a free agent after Hawkinson got hurt, so he's my other option. Goes through a lot of their other players here. Just ends with, for what it's worth, I also have Dak and Brandon Aubrey, so that would give me 5 guys in one game for the final. Help. Thanks for all the hard work you did this year. Read almost every article, listen to a lot of the podcasts. I wanted to highlight this too, because this sure sounds like panicking, and I feel like you maybe shouldn't be panicking, especially in players in this particular game, Lions and Cowboys in week 17.
I love this question because it brings in, I think, a lot of issues that a lot of fantasy managers run into, right? Which is, and a big one, of course, is like, do I really play 3 guys from the same team in one game? And in this case, obviously, you know, we're talking 5 guys in one game, but it's a kicker and a quarterback on the other side are not really a big deal. Of course you should. And that's, I don't know, there's probably a little bit of correlation there. Like, I think you probably want that. Like, that's fine. My general advice is that you need to think about the quality of the matchup and the quality of the offense. The quality of the offense is the big thing here. And Detroit is top 5 in the league, both in total yards and in scoring. I mean, this is a team that you want to be tied to. And you know, if I could handpick the 3 players that I would want to start, if I had to start 3 from this offense, you got them, right? Like those, right. Like you nailed it. Those are the 3. If we just went like one by one, these guys are all top 5 at the position for me. Like I don't know, Jahmyr Gibbs is my RB4 this week, and I think Amon-Ra is either my wide receiver 4 or my wide receiver 5, and Laporta, of course, is parked as a top 3 fantasy tight end rest of season. Like, I don't think you can sit any of these guys. And you certainly can't galaxy brain it to start Darren Waller, who just does not look, I mean, he doesn't look great right now and he doesn't look healthy. And it's a very sketchy quarterback situation. And I don't know if Darren Waller not randomly, but if Darren Waller goes off, I think you just have to, I don't know. I don't even know how bad I would feel about that coming off of week 16. There wasn't really much that I saw that gave me confidence in starting Darren Waller over Sam Laporta. I would just be kicking myself all week if I did that. Like you're investing in a game that you know, where we shouldn't need to worry about points being scored and yards being gained. And again, you're tied to the right 3 players.
I think everything you said there is perfect because it's the right offense. The Lions are one of the best offenses in the NFL, especially when they're in the right circumstances. This should be the right circumstance because how is Dallas not going to light up their defense and then push Detroit to push them as well? And 3, it's the right players from this matchup for sure. Look, you don't even have to go far back to see how this can work out for you. Just go look at the game that happened with the damn Detroit Lions last week. Like you could very well have started 3 players from this offense. It would be Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and David Montgomery. In this instance, that's 3 players that hit. You know, Sam Laporta, he only has 3 catches for 18 yards. But like, number 1, that's not the norm for Sam Laporta. Number 2, like, let's say they call up a little play action for Sam Laporta instead of plunging with David Montgomery there, and he gets the touchdown there. You're feeling perfectly fine starting 3 players from that offense. And on the flip side, like the quarterback we talked about, Nick Mullins, he throws for 400 yards and 2 touchdowns, 4 picks, but he still scores you 20 fantasy points. Dak's not throwing 4 picks. I don't know what's going to happen next week. I'm very confident. I mean, you know, knock on wood, whatever, put it on the universe. I am not. I like Dak is not throwing 4 picks against the Detroit Lions. Okay, so you don't have to even go far back to see how this can work out for you.
Yeah, this is just a great question though, and I think it gets to a topic that a lot of fantasy players have to wrestle with.
Any players you're particularly panicked on heading into this week, or shall we just get to the waiver wire?
I will just say that the guy at the top of my list, and this is a theoretical problem because all of my Patrick Mahomes teams lost, but I'd be pretty freaked out Again, mine all lost, so I don't have to worry about this because it's if he had a bad matchup, I would actively be looking for alternatives, I think, which is a wild thing to say, but it's almost more problematic because he has a great matchup. He gets Cincinnati, and we've seen we've seen that defense picked apart, right? Like this should be a blow up spot, and Patrick Mahomes with just a normal receiving core would probably be my QB1 this week. I don't think I have him in the top 5, which feels wrong, but it is a dreadful group of receivers. He has few answers at his disposal. He hasn't had a week that like tilts your fantasy matchup since maybe week 7. He had that 400-yard game, right? Like a 4-touchdown game. Since then, hasn't really been a fantasy difference maker. We've talked about this before when people were complaining about Lamar Jackson, and it was like, man, Patrick Mahomes is doing the same stuff. But it was really, it was never on him, just as it was never on Lamar. I don't think it's necessarily on Mahomes, right? We've seen numerous instances this year where like one of his receivers will turn like an easy catch into a pick 6 or into an interception. Like it's just an outclassed receiving core. They've turned kind of a bit of a developmental rookie into their wide receiver 1, and Travis Kelce is obviously like he's still going to finish with a great season, but he's not separated from the pack of tight ends right now, right? And he's clearly hurting too, which, hey, other side of 30, it was bound to happen at some point, but he's kind of limping through games a little bit. He's double catching a lot of balls. It's just not clean. It's not great. And I don't have a lot of confidence that like Kansas City probably wins this game. It's a very friendly Cincinnati defense, but last year I would have said, oh yeah, Cincinnati wins this game 38-20, something like that. I just don't see the path for Kansas City scoring 30 in this one, despite the matchup.
The part that would freak me out the most, because we got a lot of actual questions submissions this past week, was like, I should have started Joe Flacco over, Patrick Mahomes, or I should have started Jordan Love over Patrick Mahomes. And I don't know that I could have done that going into this past week, because I'm with you that up until this past week, I feel like Mahomes was almost always blameless in what was going on with Kansas City, but like he actively hurt that team on Christmas morning against the Raiders. Like, and I always get freaked out with this stuff, man, because it only takes but so long for when your situation stinks, and this situation sucks. I mean, it is awful. They're, like you said, developmental rookie Rashee Rice is their number 1 receiver, and you've got it is stunning for all the discussion that we have about the young players on this team that like MVS is just out there. And I mean, he's been out there for so long, and guys just don't get open. They struggle to really, they do a lot of gimmicky stuff, but I think they struggle to just like get guys open behind receiver. Like it's an awful situation, but it only takes, and by the way, their tackles are rough in pass protection too. It's another problem that's been there. It only takes but for so long for you to be in crappy situations for bad habits to start seeping into your game. And I think that is where my alarm bell is at with Pat Mahomes right now, is that I do think that there's just a lot of bad habits there, man. And that is pretty troubling coming into a great matchup against the Bengals, who, for all the flowers we're throwing at George Pickens right now, like that first in-breaking route, I'm like, somebody make like a decent angle and a tackle, bro. Like, what is this practice? Is this the preseason? Like, how about a little effort out there, Cincinnati? Because they've struggled up the spine all year. I actually don't have any Pat Mahomes teams period this year, much less ones that are still alive, but I would be freaking out about that for sure.
Yeah. You just want to say, okay, this is a defense that was just cooked by Mason Rudolph and George Pickens. Like, I shouldn't be questioning my Patrick Mahomes decision here. And by the way, I do have a Patrick Mahomes, Joe Flacco team, and I don't feel like, of all the things I feel bad about, I feel the least bad about that. Like, that wasn't even, I don't know. It didn't even cross my mind to start Joe Flacco over Patrick Mahomes. It would now. And in part because of what you said, like the pick 6 was a legit bad throw, right? Like that was a legit bad play. Yeah. And it's been so easy to excuse a lot of the stuff with Mahomes in Kansas City, because it's like, oh, Kadarius Toney batted another perfect throw straight up in the air. Like, right? Like I'm not putting that on Pat Mahomes. The pick six was on Pat Mahomes. The fumble was weird. They are making some, shoot themselves in the foot sort of mistakes that are just not, I don't know. These are not plays that we associate with the Chiefs.
All right. On that note, I know we got a Chiefs player to talk about here in the waiver wire section, because you definitely want to find creative ways to invest in that miserably boring offense right now, captained by one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen play the game. So for the final time this year, Andy, give us the top 5 waiver pickups heading into week 17.
Yeah, I tried to hit every position in this one just to be sure, just in case you have a little patching to do. I know we had some injuries, obviously, in week 16. Hawkinson goes down, Addison goes down, etc. So I tried to hit every spot here. I'll start with Gerald Everett, who is coming off 3 straight games in which he has 8 targets. Obviously, it's a terrible quarterback situation. We should, like, Gerald Everett might be the best receiver that Easton Stick currently has at his disposal. Like, that's a possibility. He's also facing a Denver defense that has allowed the most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So it's a pretty good spot. Again, with Keenan Allen out of the mix, he's just about as good as anybody else that they're going to throw to. So I think Gerald Everett at tight end is probably my priority. Couple of receivers, Rashid Shaheed, total boomer bust guy. I get it. But as I think I've said many times, I kind of like having one guy in my roster who like, if he gives you, I don't know, if he gives you 2 points, 3 points, you just kind of shrug because that's part of the deal. But if he goes off, now I have somebody who can reasonably win my week for me. And Shaheed is that kind of player. He just saw 9 targets, had a long touchdown. I mean, his whole fantasy profile is going to depend on him catching long touchdowns, right? Because he's a high ADOT guy. But he's got a matchup with Tampa, which has been really friendly to both passers and receivers all season. They give up, I think it's the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wideouts. Maybe it's the 4th most fantasy points. So it's a great spot for him. It is a defense that you can get deep on. I would also mention KJ Osborne, because we've talked about, the injuries that Minnesota suffered. Addison, Hawkinson. Osborne to me is just, I don't think he's at that level, but he's a total pro. And as somebody who can like step in and be productive, and who will absolutely know his assignments, I think KJ Osborne's kind of fun. He's coming off a good week, 95 yards and a touchdown. He has a nice little history of stepping up when there's a dire need in that receiving core, and there is one right now. If you need a quarterback, this would be really difficult for me, honestly, in a title matchup. But I do think that Derek Carr has the best matchup out there among the widely available quarterbacks. It's Tampa. Derek Carr has he's got back-to-back games in which he has 3 touchdown passes. It feels a little shaky this past week because at least a couple of those touchdown passes were not necessarily in the most competitive environment. But nonetheless, he has those games. He's got a healthy Chris Olave right now. And again, he's got a defense that you can definitely pick on in Tampa. And then my number 1 this week, as it currently stands, has got to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Isaiah Pacheco concussed in week 16 on that play where the helmet flipped off and he ran into somebody's knee. Jerick McKinnon is on IR. CEH has been kind of productive for the last 3 weeks. Cincinnati certainly hasn't stopped the run this season. They give up almost 5 yards per carry. So it's a good spot for him. It's also, given the state of the Chiefs receiving core, which we just talked about, it's not that difficult to imagine a scenario where, like, in the second half of this game, they're just leaning on the ground game.
Yeah, 100%. And it's a beatable defense, like we said. So it's funny, like, I'm trying to talk you out of maybe playing playing Patrick Mahomes, but let me try to talk you into ways to play Clyde Edwards-Helaire based on the defensive matchup, man. Fantasy
to be
football,
clear, I'm not starting Derek Carr over Patrick Mahomes. I don't think I could go that far. I'm not going sketchy waiver wire quarterback over Patrick Mahomes.
Oh, man, what a treat. All right, well, that does it for the Panic Meter and the Waiver Wire. Again, shout out to everybody that participated in this podcast. And most importantly, shout out to Andy Behrens for being a great co-host and coming along for the ride, even when he didn't agree with you people panicking over star NFL players.
Yeah, that's my flaw. I'm too faithful to Lamar Jackson, apparently.
Yeah, how dare you? What an outrageous thing to do. So that's going to do it for this show. Tomorrow is Thursday. You know what that means. Stat Nerd Thursday with Dalton Del Don. We give you one stat you need to know for all 32 teams heading into week 17. Until then, we're out.